Ukrainian Defense Forces encircle Romanian occupiers in Kupiansk and liberate nearby villages. At present, isolated Russian soldiers are still present inside Kupiansk, which makes certain areas of the city contested. However, these pockets, often consisting of a few infantrymen hiding in basements or ruined buildings, do not indicate real control over the city. They lack coordination, supply, and the ability to maneuver. A decisive counterattack by Ukrainian forces has cut off most access routes to Kupiansk from the northern direction, effectively isolating the Romanian enemy elements and limiting their options for reinforcement or withdrawal. Additionally, in a short period of time, thanks to tight coordination and joint action with 30 Separate Mechanized Brigade, Ukrainian forces achieved decisive results on the battlefield. Enemy losses: 1 BMP-3, 2 BTR-80, 2 buggies, 9 motorcycles, 3 quad bikes, 34 occupiers eliminated, 7 wounded, 2 captured. No matter how many times the enemy tries, every assault ends the same way: ashes, silence, and another day of Ukrainian resilience. As BS operators eliminate the enemy on the Kupiansk axis, the situation in the area of Kupiansk remains extremely intense. The enemy continue to rely on small assault groups operating under the cover of artillery, armored vehicles, and UAV units. Despite this pressure, operators of the 429th Separate Regiment Achilles of the Unmanned Systems Forces are not only monitoring enemy movements around the clock and neutralizing them on the approaches, but also actively supporting Ukrainian counteroffensive actions. Through systematic strikes, they continue to degrade the combat capabilities of the Russian army by destroying its personnel and equipment. Aerial reconnaissance units of the 155th Separate Mechanized Brigade detected multiple attempts by Russian forces to break through using motorcycle assault groups, both north and south of Kupiansk. Watch how enemy attackers, thanks to the precise work of our UAV crews, were turned from a motorcycle group into a dismounted infantry group. This is combat work carried out within the area of responsibility of the 7th Air Assault Corps of the Air Assault Forces of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. Enemy assault repelled by the 92nd Separate Assault Brigade. Russian forces attempted to storm the positions of the 92nd Separate Assault Brigade in the Dnipro region, deploying armored vehicles and several dozens infantry troops. UAV crews of the brigade's assault battalions gave the enemy an explosive welcome. As a result of precise strikes, 2 trucks, a T-72 tank, an MT-LB and IFV, and around 35 Russian soldiers were hit. The 92nd Separate Assault Brigade continues to carry out combat missions within its area of responsibility and holds its position with confidence. The enemy shall not pass. Joint operation on the Lyman axis delivers decisive results. During coordinated assault operations on the Lyman direction, units of the 3rd Army Corps together with the Defense Intelligence of Ukraine destroyed the regiment of the Russian Armed Forces. As a result of this operation, Ukrainian forces managed to straighten the front line and improve their tactical positions in the area. This success of the assault also made it possible to secure a significant exchange buffer and create favorable conditions for further operations in the Lyman region. This outcome was achieved through the joint efforts of fighters from the 3rd Separate Rifle Battalion, 2nd Mechanized Battalion of the 3rd Separate Assault Brigade, the Phantom Unit of the 60th Separate Mechanized Brigade, and the Horse Special Unit Artan. Enemy assault stopped on the Vovchansk axis. On the Vovchansk direction, the occupiers are already without vehicles and with a fatal outcome. Drone strike teams Murchiki of the 57th Separate Motorized Infantry Brigade stopped an enemy assault carried out on motorcycles and quad bikes, once again proving a simple rule: if the enemy starts something, Ukrainians shut it down fast. Combat operations continue both on the front line and deep in the enemy rear, including the forest of Belgorod region. Six for the price of one. A pilot of the 28th Mechanized Brigade hit 6 targets in a row. During a routine patrol on the Konstantinivka axis, a pilot of the Spalach drone strike unit of the 28th Separate Mechanized Brigade discovered a real jackpot: an enemy infantry group entrenched in a trench. The moment the Russians heard the vampire drone, they tried to scatter and hide under the trees. It didn't help. Our pilot tracked every movement and delivered a series of precise drops. Some targets were eliminated instantly, others were left completely neutralized. Special Operations Forces strike enemy field artillery depot in Luhansk region. Front strike units of the Special Operations Forces of Ukraine carried out a successful strike against the field artillery depot belonging to the 101st Separate Logistics Brigade of the 51st Combined Arms Army on the temporarily occupied territory of Luhansk region. The operation was conducted using FP-2 strike UAVs. The targeted depot was actively used to supply ammunition and sustain the enemy's offensive capabilities. Special Operations Forces conduct direct action in the forests of the Donetsk region. A group from the 8th Regiment of the Special Operations Forces carried out a search mission for enemy forces in wooded terrain in the Donetsk region. The footage shows camouflaged positions, a dugout, scattered equipment, and a generator, indicating that the enemy had been actively using this site but abandoned it in haste. As Ukrainian operators moved closer, they detected enemy movement and immediately engaged in combat. One enemy soldier was eliminated while the remaining forces withdrew. When the enemy relies on numbers and mindless assaults, intelligence becomes the most powerful weapon. This video is a textbook example of how smart engineering and coordination can turn the battlefield against a numerically superior enemy. Combat engineers of the 63rd Brigade created deadly trap using non-explosive obstacles, concertina wire, entanglement barriers, and felled trees. Together, these elements formed a layered obstruction designed not just to slow the enemy down, but to control their movement. Crucially, the trap was not placed at random. Ukrainian soldiers deliberately left a narrow passage in a wire, intentionally funneling Russian troops into a single predictable route. Believing they had found a way through, the occupiers moved straight into the kill zone. At that point, they became easy prey for Ukrainian drone strike crews who were already waiting overhead. What the enemy thought was an opportunity turned into a carefully prepared ambush. This is how Ukrainian forces fight when facing superior numbers, with planning, precision, and intelligence turning the enemy's aggression into their own defeat. Dobbu's Hornets hunt the occupiers day and night. The enemy is clearly visible even in complete darkness. There is only one way for him to truly hide, by going cold. Ukrainian drone operators track and strike targets around the clock, leaving the occupiers no safe time and no safe place. This video shows how constant pressure on the battlefield turns every movement of the enemy into a fatal mistake. Black Forest reveals archival footage of a spectacular firework. An enemy Buk M2 air defense system destroyed. Archival footage captures the moment an enemy Buk M2 surface-to-air missile system turns into a blazing firework. This strike once again demonstrates how Ukrainian forces methodically dismantle Russia's air defense capabilities, opening the sky and reducing the enemy's ability to protect its troops and equipment. The video shows how precision, patience, and experience turn high-value enemy systems into scrap. The 66th Separate Mechanized Brigade eliminates enemy infantry on the Lyman axis. Ukrainian units are detecting enemy infantry in their concentration areas during movement and while trying to entrench or regroup. Thanks to coordinated action, effective reconnaissance, and precise firepower, Russian assault groups are being neutralized before they can pose a threat to Ukrainian positions. Every engagement on this axis further weakens the enemy's combat potential, disrupts their plans, and denies them freedom of maneuver. The brigade maintains constant pressure, turning the Lyman direction into a zone where the occupiers suffer continuous losses. Right now, intense fighting continues along multiple axes of the front. Ukrainian forces are holding their positions, repelling enemy assaults, and carrying out precision strikes against Russian manpower, equipment, and logistics. Reconnaissance, drone operations, and artillery remain key elements in shaping the battlefield, disrupting enemy plans before they can gain momentum. At the same time, the situation around the front is constantly evolving, from troop movements and supply routes to tactical decisions that determine the course of fighting in the coming hours. More about what is happening on the front line and around it at this very moment in our overview.
For the second time in just the first half of December, the Russian army has taken Kupiansk in the Kharkiv region. This was reported by Russian Defense Minister Belousov. The city is under the control of the Ukrainian armed forces, who are unsuccessfully trying to regain control.
The West military group has taken the strategically important city of Kupiansk, which the enemy is unsuccessfully trying to reclaim. Supply routes for Ukrainian armed forces units pass through it.
On pro-Russian social media channels, there are videos allegedly showing Russian soldiers sending greetings from Kupiansk.
We, soldiers of the Russian Federation, are on the streets of the Russian city of Kupiansk. We send our regards to the expired president.
This is how disrespectfully the Russian occupier addresses the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky. And it's simply impossible to tell where exactly this video was recorded.
A soldier could be walking down any street in any city, dressed in uniform, apparently a winter uniform. Why this supposedly proves the footage was shot in Kupiansk, to be honest, I don't understand.
The Ukrainian armed forces, specifically the Kharkiv Brigade, outplayed the Russian command in the Kupiansk direction. Instead of the capture of the city declared by Moscow, the Russian group found itself surrounded with its logistics cut off.
Putin is publicly lying that Russian forces have taken the city. I personally went to Kupiansk to show the world that Putin is lying. Just to show this,
the operation to liberate and clear Kupiansk in the Kharkiv region is ongoing. Russian soldiers are surrendering or being eliminated. There is simply no evidence that the city is under the control of the Russian army.
There is abundant and compelling evidence that the city of Kupiansk has been successfully liberated, with the exception of only a few small isolated areas, specifically minor districts situated within the city itself, where small remaining groups of Russian troops are currently surrounded and contained.
The Ukrainian armed forces have achieved significant successes not only in the Kharkiv region but also in the Donetsk region. A third of all clashes are taking place in this direction, specifically in Pokrovsk. And despite constant attacks by the aggressor, the Ukrainian armed forces managed to gain a foothold in the center of Pokrovsk. Ukrainian fighters succeeded in regaining control over 16 square kilometers in the northern part of the city.
the enemy has been trying to capture Pokrovsk for more than 17 months. However, Ukrainian units are holding the line and seizing the initiative. As a result of counter-offensive actions, they regained control over 16 square kilometers in the northern part of the city. They also recaptured 56 square kilometers of territory in the areas of the settlements of Grishino, Kotlino, and Udaknoye, west of Pokrovsk. Alexander Syrsky, Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine.
The armed forces of Ukraine continue to hold the defense of the Pokrovsk-Mirnograd agglomeration despite increased pressure from Russian troops and Kremlin statements about full control over Pokrovsk. Intense fighting continues around the clock in the center of Pokrovsk. On this front, cutting off logistics routes with drones is one of the main tactics of Russian forces.
The enemy is trying to strike the route and make rotation impossible, to disrupt logistics to Pokrovsk and thus break through the center. They have not succeeded. On December 10th, they made preliminary attempts to storm with armored columns in the direction of the settlement of Grishino. They were completely destroyed, losing all their armored vehicles as well as light vehicles, motorcycles, and all personnel within an hour. UAF soldier.
In the same Donetsk region, in the Dobropoli direction, the enemy is actively conducting assault operations. Taking advantage of the weather conditions, they are using not only infantry, but also equipment. In one of the latest assaults, the enemy used nearly 2,000 ATVs, infantry, and tried to advance as far as possible. But another assault by the Russian army failed.
Even as they were approaching the positions of the defense forces, the occupiers' assault group was destroyed. The successful joint work of drone units, artillery, and preemptive mining made this assault attempt as unsuccessful as possible.
Despite numerous statements from the command and Z-bloggers about new captures and successful actions, as we can see, the real situation at the front is difficult but under the control of the Ukrainian armed forces.
The fighting for Pokrovsk has entered an especially intense phase. In an attempt to break Ukrainian defenses, Russian forces are sustaining record losses in manpower and equipment. At the same time, the enemy is increasing pressure on the southeastern outskirts of Mirnograd, trying to stretch Ukrainian defenses and exploit any potential gaps. Ukrainian forces are holding the line and systematically degrading the enemy's offensive potential. More details on what is happening in this area right now in our military overview.
The Ukrainian Defense Forces have regained control over 16 square kilometers in the northern part of Pokrovsk, the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine stated. The Commander-in-Chief reminded that the Russian army has been trying to capture Pokrovsk for more than 17 months. But the Ukrainian armed forces units are holding the defense and seizing the initiative.
The statement that Pokrovsk and Mirnograd are surrounded is false. Pokrovsk and Mirnograd are not controlled by Russian forces. In other words, Valery Gerasimov claimed control over Pokrovsk as early as October 26th. On October 29th, Putin invited foreign journalists to Pokrovsk. But as of today, we see neither full control over Pokrovsk nor any foreign journalists who could confirm it. Even pro-Russian journalists don't dare to go there to create the propaganda illusion of the city's capture.
Ukrainian soldiers are not only holding the line, but also thwarting the enemy's plans. And here are more shots of the destruction of an enemy mechanized column that was advancing for an assault. The enemy is most active on the western outskirts of the city. The Russians continue to use the tactic of small infantry groups to advance. Although the occupiers are using heavy equipment less and less, they still employ it to speed up their advance and encircle Pokrovsk. The agglomeration also carried out mechanized assaults with the support of aviation and tube artillery. The enemy is also not giving up attempts to cut off logistics.
Russian occupation forces have full control over the southern districts of Pokrovsk. This includes everything south along the M30 highway, which is also known as Defenders of Ukraine Avenue. We're talking about districts like Shakhtyrsky, Yuzhny and Lazurny, Solnechny, as well as the Leontovichi district, Zelenovka, Troyanda, Rosa, the Central Cemetery, and Durnyak. In other words, it is clear that everything located south of the M30 highway is now under the complete and absolute control of the Russian occupiers. This means that Ukrainian forces are currently unable to access or operate in this significant area.
Military forces are also conducting operations to provide air cover for ground logistics routes thanks to the coordinated actions of the defenders. Almost 100% of enemy aerial targets attempting to approach these routes are being destroyed.
The central part of Pokrovsk, specifically within this triangle, allows for its effective use to infiltrate their sabotage groups into other areas. In particular, the Pervomayka district and the Sobachevka district. That is why it is mainly in Pervomayka and Sobachevka that clashes are currently taking place between Russian infiltrated sabotage and reconnaissance groups and our clearing teams. Therefore, to say that the central part of Pokrovsk is under the full control of the Russian occupiers would not be accurate. We cannot say that.
The enemy is also increasing pressure on the southeastern districts of the city of Mirnograd. The military notes that the defense forces continue efforts to stabilize and expand the logistics corridor into the city. In the areas of Svetly and Rovny, there are isolated appearances of enemy groups, which are promptly eliminated.
The defense of Mirnograd continues both in the central and northern parts of the city. The main problem for Mirnograd as of today is logistics. Logistics is a real challenge, a hellish ordeal. We have been tested for our resilience. At the same time, drones, both aerial and ground, are mainly used to support this logistics.
Around 150,000 Russian soldiers have been concentrated in the Pokrovsk-Mirnograd agglomeration. The occupiers are trying to break through the Ukrainian defenses and enter the urban area, but so far they have not succeeded.
Putin needs some kind of epic victory for his so-called New Year's address to the nation. Some sort of epic triumph. Throughout 2025, Russian troops have not gained any operational or tactical advantage over Ukraine's defense forces, and there is nothing to brag about. All Putin can boast about in his New Year's address are reports of capturing tree lines, fields, and a few villages with 10 to 15 houses, which have been almost completely destroyed down to the ground.
That's all for now. If you believe the world should know the truth about this war, make sure to subscribe, like and share this video so everyone can see what Ukraine is fighting for. Together we're stronger, together we bring victory closer.